let's go to sex education. Now, you said you were in some... you didn't
I
teach
helped,
it yourself, but
yes,
you helped.
No. Certainly I taught.
You taught it.
And I helped to pioneer a course of sex education in the 60s.
Well, now, how would you do it today, sex education?
Well, we've learnt a great deal about sex education during the last decade, and I was very interested to talk to a delegate from Britain who went to an international conference on sex education in Israel in 1971. And he said that the one thing with which every single delegate was agreed was this, that sex education should not be given in a class impersonal situation, that it was essential that it was given in very small groups.
Groups of who? The children?
Groups of children. Now, if I may say this, out of my experience, that you can have a class which is all the same physical age, all 15, 14, 13, but within that class you can have a vast disparity of emotional development. So what sort of groups?
The teacher chooses what maturity of group she's going to teach?
I think if you have a good relationship with a class, then you know where the different groups of children
suppose you have the ideal assortment of children of the right mental age. What would be the first thing that you put to them about sex education? Well,
I think I'd want to answer your question by going a bit further back, because I don't think the place for sex education to begin is in the school at all.
Where is it?
I think it should begin in the home.
But it doesn't begin in the home. Well, otherwise schools wouldn't have taken it over.
Well, no, you're oversimplifying these things. I don't think this is true at all. That even with my husband and myself, and our eldest child is now well on in his 30s. We made up our mind all that time ago that we would answer our children's questions as they were raised.
But Mrs. Whitehouse, the only way to get parents to do that is their own sex education in schools.
Well, exactly.
It isn't going to happen just by you wishing it to happen.
No, if I may say, that this is the first thing, that we have to actually raise a generation of children who when they're adults...
sex education in school? It has to begin there. How would it begin elsewhere?
Can I just finish what I'm trying to say? We have to educate a generation of children now who will in their turn be able to talk to their own children.
How?
But ideally first, parents to talk to their children. But now then the second thing, and this was something that we discovered from our own experience, that if you're not very careful, you can do a lot of things as sex education in schools, but you can do one or two things which are very important. One is you can divide a child from his parents. You can, by giving them sex education in schools and not involving the parent, you can actually divide those two generations.
In what way? Because the child knows more?
Well, we found it at school. I mean, I remember one boy writing back in a questionnaire to us, "Now I've had this at school, I shan't talk to my parents." And it was that made us stop what we were doing.
That is exactly what happened in Open Night. The children said, I don't like watching programmes with sex in them with my parents because they feel uneasy because I know
Well, now,
about
can I tell you
things.
what we then did on the basis of that experience with the children? We reorganised the whole of our sex education on a basis of total involvement with the parents. We had the parents into school every year, not once, but every year, to talk to them, to show them some of the things we had in mind in the way of film strips and films and so on.
What sort of things now? Because that's what I want to get down to. What kind of things would you show? Do you show diagrams of
Jill, may I just finish this one particular point and come back to that, because I think it's very important. We had them in to discuss the whole syllabus. Then we invited them in to some of the lessons in school. And then we put on special discussions and use films at night, and we invited mothers with their daughters and fathers with their sons. It has to be said that more mothers came with daughters than fathers with sons. So that was a major thing we did, the total involvement with the parent. And you see, the thing that I remember so well are the mothers who said to me, "Miss, we want to talk to them, but we don't know the words to use."
Yes.
So we said, "Right, you come and we'll teach you the words to use." So that was the first thing.
What words did you use then?
The medical terms.
The medical terms.
Certainly.
But that is not what children use, not what adults use.
Well, this is precisely what I was talking about earlier, about helping our children to grow from rather the crudities of sexual expression.
But why do you say the crudities?
Because
they are the general use.
I'm
Medical
sorry.
terms is what doctors use.
Well, I don't know you say general use.
No,
you're not
if I say my shoulder bone, it's my shoulder bone. The doctor would say clavicle.
Oh, well,
I don't say clavicle.
Well, you're not really suggesting, are you, that it is normal use amongst people in their homes and so on to use four-letter words?
Yes, I am, really.
Oh, you are?
Yes,
well, you must mix with different people.
No. I'm saying that I think that, honestly, most people do use the four-letter words or the pet names, but they do not use the medical words. And if you're going to have sex education based on the penis, my son won't understand what you mean.
Well, then I'm sorry for your son.
No, because he says willy, and that will work out until he's old enough to understand the medical word.
Exactly. You're talking about old enough. We're maybe talking about different ages of children. I'm not talking about little children. I'm talking now about adolescent children growing to adulthood, and I would suspect that you wouldn't expect your son, when he's grown up, to talk about his willy.
Certainly not.
Right.
No,
well,
but I gauge
about.
It to his age.
Exactly.
You're talking about sex education classes that tell him the medical term.
Yes.
He won't understand that. I won't understand it possibly with him.
I mean, I think in a way
it's not normal.
We're wasting time on this unless we're clear about what age group we're talking about. And I think that children who have used terms like that, in fact I know from the kind of very careful research we did all the time with these children, that they feel that they're that much more mature and that much more grown up when they leave these childish words behind them and they come to the more
medical
well, I would have thought mature terms. I mean, I don't know. If you've got a choice between using words which are either very childish or in some way very crude, I would have thought the natural thing to do is to use the medical term.
Would you have in your sex education classes lessons on the pleasure of sex?
I would have thought that this was implicit. I mean,
it isn't implicit. I mean, not diagrams on the wall. Not implicit
pleasure.
We
could talk about all this all day, but if you really want to know what we did with our sex education, if one doesn't accept and understand that sex is meant to be a joy, which is rather how I would put it, rather than pleasure, which is perhaps a lower connotation of human experience, of course one teaches children this, but along with it, of course, the responsibility which goes, and without which you can't have the real joy.
Mrs. Whitehouse, you say, of course, but I mean, in my sex education classes at school, all those years ago, nobody told me the pleasure. They told me about the woman's reproductive apparatus, and I have 2 children. They never told me about the woman's pleasure apparatus, which, let's say, is the clitoris. Do you?
Well, that comes in.
Does it?
Well, of course it does. I mean, I don't know how much you know about sex education in schools or which group of children you're talking to.
I only know what you feel is it wrong, which was Princess Martin Cole's sex education
film.
Well,
if you're going to talk about that, that is a totally different
what I mean.
Fish.
Well, let's agree it was a bad film.
Well, here it was bad.
Technically.
Not only was a bad film, but it put back the whole cause of sex education by at least a decade. I had not only parents, I had headmistresses ringing into me and telling me, and one of these headmistresses actually had been a junior member of staff on the school when I had been responsible for sex education, and she said how she had built up a wonderful relationship of trust between the staff and the parents in this whole field of sex education. And when Martin Cole's film came out, she said this has caused so much anxiety amongst the parents. She said that it's destroying everything that we did.
Well, let's get out of sex education and go on to pornography. Now, you're very active in this field. I mean, you have been through the Longford Report and so on. Now, what pornography have you seen? Have you seen what you would describe as pornography on television?
I think there's very little pornography on television indeed.
You haven't seen what
I
you would describe
I think there have been very rare cases. There was one programme that where the production team went to Denmark and went into a studio where they were making a blue film. I think there was pornography in that. I think there's very little pornography as such. I think there's a good deal of indecency, which is a very different thing.
How do you define indecency?
Well, I think language can be indecent. I also think that people as a whole, and certainly speaking for myself, that I haven't the slightest desire to be turned into a peeping Tom. I think that people resent very much, particularly mature people who themselves know what life's all about. They have no desire at all to sit in a chair in their room and watch two complete strangers having sex.
But if you're peeping Tom, you actually...
cold.
Yes, all right. But then if you're peeping
And it's
Tom,
an
you
impertinence.
You watch, but on purpose. If it's television, you can turn it off. You can stop yourself being a peeping Tom.
Well, about that matter of the switch, I think it is the most facile argument that exists. Quite apart from anything else, you don't really know you've got to switch off until the thing's happened. But in any case...
Mostly you do these days with criticism. After all, the Warhol film was stopped because of critics.
That's the only reason. It's absolutely unique. People actually know what's going to be in that programme. Therefore, they are in a position to watch or not to watch because they know.
Do you not feel that most of that today, most of us know in advance, if we have any interest in television, what is going to happen and how indelicate or otherwise
I think,
it's going to be?
of course, there are certain series. I mean, Up Pompeii, for instance.
Yes.
Where obviously one knows what's going to come. But I think
Don't you feel strongly about that?
Well, what I was going to say about that is this, that it's rather getting to the stage now where people who don't want suggestiveness of this kind have really very little choice when it comes to light entertainment.